So why do you think the camera speed is slowed down for John? Mary?
Because it's made such an impression on this young man, and he would have only been a young man.
John is absolutely stunned, and he can remember. We don't know how many years later, but it could be as many as 50 years later. It is the video of that scene is just. It was burned on his retina almost, certainly on his brain. He can see every move that Jesus made. So he even mentions, let's just go through the movements. And they're unnecessary. Why doesn't he just say, there's plenty of times in the Gospels where it says, that, they wash their feet. But he describes everything that, so he rose from supper. And then he laid aside, he takes off his cloak, taking a towel, and he ties it around his waist. And then he can still see Jesus pouring water into that basin. And then washing the feet and wiping him with towel. What do you think John feels about Jesus? Just from this scene? Yes?
He puts people before tradition.
He puts people before tradition. Any other thoughts?
He's overawed, really.
Yeah, he's what?
Overawed.
He's overawed. He's overawed. To see a leader, and what's he overawed at?
It's how humble Jesus was.
Just how humble he is. And immediately there, you're making a connection between how inseparable humility and love are. I mean, just any other thoughts? Yes.
He's writing in retrospect, so he's looking back.
Yeah.
He knows what's coming. He knows that the cross is coming.
Yeah.
And then he's thinking of others rather than himself.
Yes. Yes. Yep. Yes.
He also writes as if Jesus is quite matter of fact about what he's doing.
Yeah.
There's no show about it.
There is no show, and the Scripture is so sublime. I mean, it makes it powerful. There's no Victorian frill here, and there's no soft music playing in the background. And the advantage of that is that it makes the image stand out much better. I mean, it's riveting writing. It's just riveting. Any other thoughts? I mean, what's going through John's mind? What's he learned from Jesus? Yes?
An example of Jesus' humility and love.
Yeah. Yep. Yes?
Can I broaden it a little bit?
Sure.
This incident, do you think it's connected in any way with the incident recorded in Luke's Gospel in chapter 22, where it says a dispute arose?
Yes.
Yes. And I wonder whether Jesus did it as a practical example.
Yes.
Of
The first person I heard, well, I'm sure there might have been others, but Edersheim, his Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, taught at Oxford 150 years ago. It's sort of a classic on Jesus, but he draws the connection between those two incidents, and it happened that the dispute, and you have to go into lesson. What's the lesson on humility? 38. Lesson 38 of the Person of Jesus study. We draw that connection, but we learned it from a British scholar, Edersheim. Yes, that the two incidents, because it happened Luke tells us that it happened at the beginning of the meal, and that's when, and Edersheim suggests that the disputers, who are the greatest, would be perfectly, it's likely at the beginning of the meal, because that's when the seating order took place. And there is something odd about the results of the seating order that Peter is not next to Jesus. He has to whisper to John, which suggests, see, you should have never said that. The typical table at that time was like this, and here's the head of the table, Jesus. And we know that that John is to Jesus' right because he leans on his breast. He leans backwards. And it looks like, and Edersheim suggests that the seating order is like this. And what's unusual is Peter is not near Jesus. He's clearly the head disciple, which suggests that Peter, after Jesus' rebuke about seating order, goes to the bottom of the table in sort of typical Peter fashion. And to find out what Jesus is saying, he's got to kind of whisper over to John. That's an inference. We don't know that for sure. But anyway, it's kind of fun. Any other reflections? I mean, that little mini thing there is all about what our study of Jesus about as a person is like. And it remaps how you think about your own life. I mean, just what I just want to give that little taste of Christ that and then pretty soon that image gets in your own mind. And so when you have to take out of the trash, at home, and maybe you've not been thanked or you're treated badly, all of a sudden it becomes a window to Him, to knowing Him better. Now, I'm going to go back to our little outline here, and where the heck did our outline go? Oh, here it is. And I want to first look at barriers to Jesus, and there are, I believe, 4 barriers that we've had to seeing the person of Jesus. And I believe the first barrier is the lingering influence on the early church of Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism, in a nutshell, did the exact opposite of the Enlightenment. Here's kind of a Neoplatonist worldview. If this is everything there is, if this up here is the world of ideas, so God, love, prayer is here, and here's the world of trees, chairs, etc. Okay? Neoplatonism said that the world of ideas is the more real world than the world of things. And so, for instance, in the Gnostic Gospels, which the church rejected, soundly rejected, and we've just, for the first time a couple years ago, they found a text to the Gospel of Judas. And in typical Neoplatonism fashion, in the Gospel of Judas, Judas gives Jesus up to be crucified so he could be freed from his body. In other words, it is a dislike of the physical. And let me just show you another little chart here that will help just get your mind around this a little bit. This is a chart of Chalcedon and the view of God-man in Chalcedon, that we have Jesus is the God-man, and we have 2 heresies. There is the Greek heresy, and there is the Jewish heresy. And again, Chalcedon and these are heretical, and I'm going to talk about them. So the Greek heresy it would emphasize, in a sense, he's God, but he is just simply appears to be a man. One of the words for this, it had different forms, was docetism, which comes from the Greek word dokeo, which is to seem. So he just seemed to be a man. Because the Greeks really did not like the physicality. It's actually a lot of similarities with a lot of aspects of Buddhist thought. It is why, for those of you who have read A Praying Life, it is one of the reasons even though the early church rejected Gnosticism, Gnosticism tended to function like the frame over a kind of a lens on how you viewed life. So it only permitted certain questions to the table or certain discussions to the table. And then the Jewish heresy was actually the biggest problem of the early church. Up until 70 A.D., and the split that comes between Judaism and Christianity at 70 A.D., when that, prior to that split, the first 40 years, the Jewish heresy on this side here was the church's biggest problem. And the Jewish heresy had several windows to it, but one of them were the Ebionites. And we do not know a ton about the Ebionites. We know that they just used the book of Matthew. Eusebius tells us that he did a Hebrew or Aramaic version, probably Hebrew version of the book of Matthew, and that was their only Bible. And the Ebionites believed that Jesus was not only a rabbi, but he was a prophet, and in fact, he was the Messiah. So every disciple was an Ebionite right up to the resurrection. The Ebionites never moved to Chalcedon, to the worship of Jesus, by the way, it didn't come. I mean, Chalcedon simply recognized, the Council of Chalcedon in the 300s, simply recognized what the church had been doing for 300 years. Kind of a liberal lie out there is that Chalcedon kind of created a view of Jesus. But the Ebionites were followers of Jesus who didn't believe he was God. And just a little interesting side note, the Ebionites, after the Romans in the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 130, the Romans were so fed up with the Jewish people that they expelled them from Judea. And so you were not allowed to live in Judea and be a Jewish person was not allowed to be there. And the Ebionites all went down south to where, along the southern border of Saudi Arabia, down below Petra, and in the area of Mecca and Medina and that whole area. And Muhammad, there were still a thriving Ebionite church down there. The Ebionite bishop of Mecca was a man by the name of Waraka. And he was the cousin of Muhammad's wife. And I'll write his name down, Waraka. And Waraka was the mentor of Muhammad. So the view of Christianity that is in Islam is Ebionitism. A typical Muslim is very open to the person of Jesus. They like him as a person, not as God. I think he's mentioned like 90 times in the Quran. Mary is the only woman mentioned in the Quran. Islam's roots, are pretty much Ebionite plus kind of extreme orthodoxy with a superhero, Muhammad, in the center of it is pretty much Islam, which is why that's just we are actually very active now in the beginning stages of doing a Arabic translation of our Person of Jesus study that has some of the early. We've just got a lot of encouragement from missionaries working in the Muslim world who are eager to use it, and we actually. Bob and Julie are going to be training a large group of Muslim missionaries in Turkey in January in our studies. Okay, this frame that I've given you here is just a background here a little bit to the. Even though the church soundly rejected officially Gnosticism, it tended to put a fog over Jesus' deity. I haven't figured out how to do a fog on my PowerPoint yet. Does that come through as a fog? And a kind of not a deprecation of his manhood, but almost a not seeing it. And another reason, number one, we're all under number one here, barriers to seeing Jesus as a person. The first barrier is this Gnosticism, Neoplatonism. The second barrier, and it is that in the Reformation itself, we discovered kind of the great discovery of the Reformation is the priority of faith working through love. And we realized through Luther and his disciple Calvin that you cannot begin with your love. As powerful as love is, it has that we cannot begin with ourselves. That's why it's all of grace. The first move has to be God. And in fact, not only does the first move have to be God, we have to continually go back to that first move. And Paul's little summary of what that looks like in the life is one of my favorite verses that summarizes the Reformation is Galatians 5:6. For neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. In other words, faith has to be the energy for love. And we were so excited by faith, and particularly justification by faith, that there was a tendency to